a world of smart cities which are hyper connected, full of IoT devices where payments actually go in waves. Because these microtransactions aren't click, 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 clunk, 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 or batched. They move in a very different way. So you get an ebb and flow of value transfer across this web, this mesh. That's a very different world with hugely different opportunities. That's going to take us a little while to get to. But all of these experiments are preparing us, I think, for that kind of world. If I can break the 10,000 throttle, I'd be very happy.
Welcome to Hedera Hashgraph's Gossip About Gossip. If you are a developer, an entrepreneur, crypto enthusiast, or just trying to learn more about how distributed ledger technology and Hedera Hashgraph will impact your industry, then you'll love the episodes that we have coming up. Bookmark us, add us to your podcast app, and stay tuned.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of Gossip About Gossip. I'm Cooper Kunz, your host for today, and I'm very excited to be joined by Christian Hasker, the Chief Marketing Officer at Hedera Hashgraph. Hi, Christian.
Hey, Cooper. It is great to be here. I am standing in for Paul Madsen, who is on holiday at the moment, vacation. It is a temporary stand-in, but if I do a good job, then maybe it'll be permanent. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm not as funny as Paul, so we had to bring in Christian here to make sure we get the average joke quota hit. The jokes per second, some might say.
Yeah, he's very dry. Maybe I won't be so dry.
Well, I appreciate your time and thank you for joining us today. And we're also joined, I'm very excited about this, joined by Rob Allen. How are you doing, Rob?
Hey guys, very excited to be on the podcast. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for your time. Just to kick us off here, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
So I'm an engineer, an entrepreneur, and a consultant focusing on emerging technology and trying to solve big problems. I started my career as an Army systems engineer building distributed, resilient battlefield command and control systems. I did some time at Intel on supply chain systems and then fell into banking in the UK. Spent over a decade building payments and core banking systems for some of Europe's largest banks. I came to Australia about 6 years ago, Brexit refugee, ostensibly to found PwC's fintech business. And I built a blockchain platform for them, which we piloted with a number of banks for cross-border remittance and payments. But ultimately we were too early for real adoption at that stage. But that platform's still in use and it's being used as an inter-firm accounting and treasury platform now. I left PwC to set up my own consulting business, which is focused on the application of emerging tech and blockchain distributed ledgers to the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. So things like renewable energy, circular economies, waste management, that sort of thing. And I wrote a book on fintech and financial inclusion as well as part of that. I serve as Deputy Chairman of Blockchain Australia, which is the national industry body for blockchain and distributed ledger businesses. I'm the Executive Director and Non-Exec Director of various fintech startups and advisor. And now I'm entrepreneur in residence at Eftpos, where I lead some really cool emerging tech initiatives. Sorry, very long.
Oh, no need to apologize. It sounds like you have a wealth of experience, and that is, one of the reasons why I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today. I think we're going to dive a lot into your background and specifically the work that you're doing currently at Eftpos. But would you mind telling us a little bit about how you found Hedera? How did you come to the community?
So when I was at PwC building this blockchain platform that I mentioned, which we called Vulcan, which in itself is pretty cool, I designed it to be agnostic of the underlying ledgers. And we started with Bitcoin and a Bitcoin fork. Then we built a colored coin stack on top of it. We tested with other ledgers such as multi-chain, but ultimately integrated it also with things like Hyperledger and Corda, just to demonstrate this agnostic nature. But as a payments guy, I always felt dissatisfied by the constraints of blockchain. This thing we call the trilemma, this tension between decentralization and security and scale. And so when I heard about Hashgraph in 2017, I took the opportunity while I was in the US to meet with Mance and Lehman. Ended up going out for dinner and beers with Tom and Jordan and wanted to find out more about it. This was in the original Swirls days, but I realized that Lehman had invented the thing that I needed. He described the concepts behind what became HCS, Consensus as a Service, and my mind was just blown. But it was too early to integrate at that stage, but it had piqued my interest enough to stay kind of involved with whatever I could consume. And things were fairly slow. I mean, it's going at a rapid old pace these days, but then I was keen to understand how I could work with Hedera for the platforms that I was building. But I left PwC soon after that. We tried to spin out the business and ultimately were unsuccessful. So I left anyway. I've done a few things with other DLTs, but stayed in the community, kept on learning and working out what I would do when the time was right. This year, that has finally become possible.
So you are one of the originals in the community, Rob, which is fantastic. I know you've made, since the Eftpos announcement a couple of weeks ago, I think you've shot up the ranks. You're known in Telegram as @SharkyRob, I believe. What's the derivation of @SharkyRob?
It's one of these things online, isn't it? It's very difficult to know how to present oneself across so many different, it's an identity thing. One of the aspects of my particular life is my interest in sharks. It's literally about sharks and shark conservation and swimming and diving and photographing sharks. So I've been doing that since I left the army over 20 years ago, taking groups around the world to, just dump them in the water and, come face to face with big toothy apex predators. So my friends call me Sharky, and so Sharky Rob is how my Telegram group name started, because I was only using Telegram for personal stuff, and then it's very difficult to switch into something a bit more professional, so it comes with me.
Oh, that's fantastic. If ever you're in San Francisco, I've always wanted to go out to the Farallons actually and go down
Farallons is
in a
awesome.
cage.
The red triangle. It's well, we don't do cages except with the great whites, and they're the ones that you need.
They're the ones that are out there. But anyway, we're a little off track. Apologies, listeners, but this is fun stuff. But let's get back to Eftpos. And I know very famous in Australia, but probably for most people out there, they have not heard of Eftpos. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So Eftpos is the Australian national debit card infrastructure. It's been around about 30 years. It's like it's set up like a scheme, like Visa or MasterCard, but it's a national debit card infrastructure. It's a non-profit, and it's membership based. So it's got 19 of Australia's kind of iconic financial services and payments related businesses as kind of joint owners of the business. That includes the 4 big banks here, some second tier banks, some foreign banks that are effectively second tiers here, like Citi. The 2 big retailers, Woolworths and Coles, are the big kind of supermarket chains in Australia. So they have their own, obviously, needs for payments and are part of that scheme. Payments aggregators and gateway businesses. So it's a board that operates kind of like a governing council with 19 of the biggest brands in Australia. It's like Switzerland. It's a demilitarized zone between otherwise competing businesses, and it's the perfect place for innovation. It's got a very forward-thinking, innovative perspective on payments infrastructure. And that's one of the things I've been able to tap into and join and lead as well.
That's very interesting. And, our listeners are probably very familiar with what like a Visa or a MasterCard is like, especially in those listening in the United States. But how kind of prevalent is Eftpos in Australia? Is it something everyone uses? Is it just something for back-end banking companies to care about? What does that kind of look like?
No, it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's even one of Australia's most trusted brands. Australians talk about paying with Eftpos. They don't really. It's not Visa or MasterCard or paying by card or touchless or contactless or whatever. they talk about paying by Eftpos, and it means many different things to different people, unfortunately. But that it's that interaction in a store where one pays with a card. All the cards issued by banks in Australia have most of them, in fact, have kind of two schemes. So they have the primary international scheme, like Visa or MasterCard, and they have Eftpos as well. And the chips on the cards have two slots that enable payments to be routed one way or the other. And it's up to the merchant and the merchant acquiring bank to determine where those payments are routed. The Eftpos infrastructure is far cheaper than the international schemes, so it's about half the transactional cost of going via Visa or MasterCard, and therefore merchants are keen, especially in these current COVID times, to save costs. And our central bank, the RBA here, is very keen that they should do that as well.
That's fascinating. Something has to be pretty widely used for it to become a verb like that.
Yeah, and it really is. It was quite a surprise for me when I came here, because it's not the kind of thing that the UK has or does, but it's everywhere. Very well known.
And Rob, I know from previous conversations, you're sort of leading the charge there at Eftpos from an innovation standpoint, and got at least two exciting projects that I know about. Maybe you could tell people sort of your initial focus to Eftpos, and then obviously how you are leading the charge with a micropayments proof of concept.
Yeah, so about a year ago, Eftpos made a strategic decision to diversify away from its core payments infrastructure. So to remain relevant, to stay informed, to create adjacent technologies that enhance the core payments infrastructure. And one of those things is digital identity. So as I'm sure we all know now, online privacy, citizens' ability to interact online in a safe and secure way kind of goes hand in hand with most online commerce. And so verification of identity followed by a payment interaction made it perfect.
How do you prove you're Sharky Rob across all those different channels?
How do you prove you're a real person and not a shark on the internet? Yeah, absolutely. Or a bot, a shark bot. So I came in February. I've done some work with Eftpos in the past, so I was a known quantity, but I came in February ostensibly to lead an innovation project around digital identity. And we took a kind of a lean startup approach. We were very innovative, very, in some ways, separated from the core business, which had to, run on a methodical, 6 nines uptime type approach. So we were able to do the disruptive innovation, all the cool stuff on the side, and I brought the A team together to do that, and nailed it on every front. So the Australia have two kind of aligned identity frameworks, one which is a government services one called TDIF, and one which is a kind of commercial private business and financial services one called Trust ID, both federated models. So we're building a federated model-based system, but with an intention to be interoperable with self-sovereign identity type future states. So that's been running since February and going amazingly. We launched that. We came out of stealth a couple of weeks ago at the same time as the micropayments one, which kind of confused matters a little. We'd established a way of innovating that was so compelling. There were other opportunities, so other things that Eftpos could be doing. And, I've been a payments guy. I've always been really interested in ways to use, as I said earlier, emerging tech and distributed ledgers to entirely shake up and entirely shake up the clunky old payments infrastructures that we've been building for the last 30 or 40 years. And so I had the opportunity a few months ago, to pitch for a micropayments project. And so having followed Hedera's kind of progress on that front for a while, we decided that Hedera would be the perfect partner for it.
That's really, really exciting. Could you just, maybe at a high level, a 10,000 foot view, tell us what your kind of goals are for the Eftpos micropayments project?
The objectives that we've set ourselves, how do I put this? without giving too much away. The objectives we've set ourselves are to kind of line up a number of experiments to prove both the capability and the product market fit. You need both. I'm pretty convinced that the technology will work, but how do we take it to market? So this range of experiments will feed one on the other to build up this kind of picture of capability that's in a direction that we may or may not end up in the direction that we first started in. What that really means is we'll create a wallet, and that wallet will be the consumer touch point for unifying three main things. Payments capability, so your kind of Apple Pay type interaction where you load a card in. That's the interoperable or integration point with the existing Eftpos infrastructure. There'll be a kind of verifiable credentials wallet in there as well. So one can identify oneself in a self-sovereign way and manage consent, the consent of interacting with online services. And then third, a micropayments account. Now, you might call that an HBAR wallet, but for consumer purposes, we need to make sure that it's familiar to them. And these three things, this kind of unification of different types of wallet in one consumer touch point is the thing I really want to prove out. What does that look like from a user experience perspective? How can they use it? How can it be leveraged for other things, such as the digital identity program we're running? And finally, I really want to performance test this network. We've seen some amazing throughput on Hedera so far. I think that can be pushed up a little bit. I want to turn the dial to 11.
Great Spinal Tap reference. We want you to do that too. Rob, with your micropayments use case and really pushing some throughput, and again, without giving too much away, but how do you go about the second part of what you talked about, which is product market fit? At Hedera, we're all convinced that there are broken business models on the internet today. It's not a seamless experience. You hit these paywalls, you hit these advertisements, it's not fun. How are you going to go about trying to establish that area of things without obviously giving maybe names away that you can't give away?
We will do it with partners, and we're kind of building those partnerships right now. I think it's important that we are able to test this in as live-like a user experience as possible. Again, following this lean startup or fintech startup approach, you've got to get product into the hands of real users and then get very quick feedback and then iterate quickly. I mean, that's the whole model. Build, measure, learn, repeat. And everything we do in the innovation space follows that model. And only then can you actually really find or determine whether your hypothesis is correct. And my hypothesis in this is paywalls are the result of entirely clunky internet architecture that, and when the W3C deliberately ruled out payments as sort of native in terms of the specification for the World Wide Web back in the late 90s or whenever it was, that enabled all these clunky add-ons to grow up. And of course, I think in the community, believe that Hedera and an internet of value can replace all that. So the low-hanging fruit for me here is that we find good use cases that resonate. And surprisingly, actually, we thought, through this whole media process that we've done in the last couple of weeks, we thought we'd get quite a lot of pushback because we're disrupting basic business models that have grown up over the years. But we're actually getting a lot of really good response from those online content providers whose business models will be most disrupted. And they realize, and I suspect it's because subscriptions are falling, the addressable market suddenly becomes a magnitude greater or more, where consumers can pay cents for access to a single page on a page-by-page basis, where streaming services can be set up for consumers to pay per second or per minute, where gaming systems, can be paid for on use. So you pay for what you eat, right? And so all of these models can actually be changed fundamentally. And so we're carefully selecting partners right now that have a broad enough user base that we can, test with and get that feedback and find that fit and then move on. Because, Eftpos are infrastructure, right? We want to enable businesses to be built on top of it and utilize it. And if all this works, then of course, when you've got a transactional payment that costs 1/100 of a cent, US cent, as opposed to existing payments infrastructure, which can cost 10, 20, 30 cents per transaction, that's 100 times difference between those two kind of cost points. And that will significantly change business models. When you can actually make a profit at scale for offering transactions at 1/50th of a cent, for example, we haven't even started thinking about what that might do in terms of new micro-commerce online. And not only online, in the real world as well. I've got, with my futurist hat on, I imagine Internet of Things devices making micropayments, fractions of a cent payment in between them, under delegated authority of my identity. This is where identity comes in again. It's all about being able to identify and validate the behavior of one's kind of web of devices or interactions. Great way to incentivize and influence behavior and everything else. So many things that can be done with this, but we're taking the baby steps first.
Yeah, it definitely seems like you need to build out that, like you said, ecosystem of partners and, supporting companies, because at the end of the day, it's about enabling the other people that can provide value.
We want to be the rails. We want to provide the infrastructure, and we don't want to make a massive land grab. We're doing the same thing with the identity system, because it's a scheme-based approach. You need members, you need the organizations to come in and collaborate with you. We're not waiting for them on micropayments, because this is so far out there for some of them that we need to demonstrate it first. So we're kind of taking we're doing the heavy lifting first. Well, actually, we're not. Hedera have done all the heavy lifting. We're just utilizing it in a way that we can bring it to market.
Yeah, and for those listening in, before we were open access, as we were testing the network, we sort of trialed this ourselves, so we know it works. In fact, Cooper was very heavily involved. He built the daily timestamp and did the integration with the browser wallet. It was a great deal. You paid a tiny fraction to unlock an article, but then we gave you more HBARs back. So not a great business for us, but I think people had fun with it.
I think that was just a superb way of bringing the community together to showcase what I consider to be the killer app, or one of the killer apps of the network, the Hedera network. And actually, it was through doing that I was convinced, it was a year ago now, wasn't it? This was the thing that I wanted to bring to the world. A lot's moved on. When I spoke to you guys a few months ago about how we would do this, and said, well, we just have to spin up daily timestamp again and do that. And I was told, no, we've got three iterations of code to work on tokenization and stablecoins and the wallets and everything else. So we're going to re-architect this whole thing together, and that's what we're doing. The heavy lifting's been done. If you've seen the podcasts and Cooper's podcasts on tokenization and the stablecoin stuff, the DID method that Paul has published, on for self-sovereign identity, and the SDKs that underpin all of these things, is becoming like a Lego box, for a Lego box of cool things that all you need to do is assemble them and take them to market. That's the Hedera principle, isn't it? It's making things very easy. Nick from Hash Info was telling me the other day that this is, because I love the Trust Bucket thing. I think Trust Bucket is such an awesome but simple idea that Brady, I think it was Brady and Nick.
Well, Brady takes all the credit. Maybe you should tell people what Trust Bucket is. Well,
maybe Cooper should, because from my perspective, Trust Bucket is a way of applying provenance to files in a really simple way. So you can just upload them to an S3 bucket, and they get timestamped and onto the HCS, and you've got a hash that shows that document was in existence at that point in time. Did I get that right, Cooper?
That is definitely correct. It is a S3 Amazon Web Services integration between the Hedera consensus service and file uploads. So anytime you add a file to what's probably the most popular file storage service out there now, it'll get hashed and sent over the Hedera consensus service, and anyone can prove the contents of your S3 bucket at any given time, which is super interesting. And we're actually using that on Hedera.com now for things like our council meeting minutes and our token economics papers. So anyone who goes and checks those out on Hedera.com will be able to see that. And I'm sure that Nick and Brady and everyone else who worked on it will appreciate the shout out. As much as I appreciate the shout out for the work on the daily timestamp, it's great to hear that those building blocks that feel like we built forever ago are still helping and inspiring new use cases.
Yeah, and my point was that Nick was saying that it's only a few lines of code. I mean, it may be 50 lines of code. I don't know. I've not looked at it, and it's open source, so I should look at it. But it was very simple to do because all the building blocks were there, and something as compelling as what Trust Bucket does. If you go back maybe 5 years, maybe more, in this kind of Bitcoin blockchain days where people were trying to build layer 2 solutions on that public blockchain, whole businesses were raising millions of dollars around that one use case. And with Hedera, one hackathon project and everyone in the world can use it. It's just amazing. So I'm looking at ways of kind of utilizing as many of the cool widgets that are coming out of the community as possible.
Yeah, I'm really happy to hear you give that Lego box analogy. It's something we don't talk about publicly probably enough, but we are very confident that we have the best tech and a superior governance model to some of the other public chains out there. But it's also an internal drumbeat to make this stuff as easy to use as possible, because you don't want that barrier to adoption to be high. So it is, Nick's exactly right. It's just a few lines of code. We want anyone to be able to integrate Hedera consensus service just so easily, like it's a no-brainer. Like, why wouldn't you do that? So thank you for talking about that. I did want to just drill into, you talked earlier a little bit about the familiarity for Eftpos users, and you also talked about how Hedera has evolved. So I think your plan is not to do an HBAR enabled micropayment, but actually to do an Australian dollar type micropayment. So first of all, can you define what a micropayment might look like in Australian dollars? Like, how much are we talking about for these, units of value, and how do you build something like that?
So in the payment space, micropayments are less than what I was saying earlier, so 10, 20, 30 cents, anything that is actually less than the cost of the infrastructure, or the cost that the infrastructure puts on the units of payment is a micropayment. For me, a micropayment is something that's less than a cent, or it goes down to tenths of a cent. Other than centralized solutions, which are inherently insecure, no other technology that I've looked at over the last 20 plus years in the payment space can do that, other than Hedera. So that's one thing. I don't think the world, or Joe in the street, isn't ready for paying for accessing the Financial Times with HBAR yet. They will be.
That is true. Today, that is true.
So we need to move towards that, in that direction. But what they are familiar with is a kind of bank account metaphor where they can, using their mobile phone, top up their account or transfer funds from one place to another. So from their bank account to their wallet account, let's say we'll top up $10, and then we'll use that $10 account to make 1 cent payments. and you can get a lot of 1 cent payments out of $10. But to do that, and you can do that on a number of ways, but the most secure way and the best use of the technology is using stablecoins. The PwC platform that we built, the Vulcan platform, was a stablecoin platform. So, I've done cross-border remittances, tested and piloted with banks. So I understand the architecture and the designs that need to be put in place to do that sort of thing. We can do it pretty simply now, given the tokenization examples and source code that's been made available through GitHub, and the stablecoin stuff that Greg Scallard and Tim McHale have been working on. We're going to reuse that. We're going to create a one-to-one fiat to token backed stablecoin, which is denominated in Australian dollars. And we're going to put it in the wallet and allow users to spend their heart's content at 0.5 cent at a time.
That's really could.
Of course, we could. I mean, exactly the same infrastructure could operate at $500 as well. But we're targeting the end of the spectrum where no one else is able to target at the moment.
Yeah, that's one of the best examples of financial innovation are those use cases and ways to provide value to customers that just physically or technologically weren't possible in legacy systems. So it's really interesting to hear about what will probably be the first stablecoin available on Hedera Hashgraph. So that's really great. Is this something that your average Joe on the street would know uses Hedera, or is this something that just kind of automatically happens through Eftpos and it's kind of all just magic behind the scenes?
I think it has to be. I think it has to be magic behind the scenes. I want the world to understand the capabilities of this network, but no one really understands any more about TCP/IP. They don't understand about other network protocols. The whole communication stack that built up over decades. And actually, I see HCS as another layer like that. I don't see it as a distributed ledger per se. I just simply see it as the evolution of an internet protocol. The growing network, the node structure is all very analogous to how the internet started and grew in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So I think it holds. Of course, we're using cryptographic proofs and consensus and decentralization, gossip about gossip and virtual voting, and all these inventions have come together to enable this to be secure and fast and safe to run commerce platforms on. Yeah, I've lost track of your question, but
no worries. You definitely answered whether it would happen automatically behind the scenes. So that's super interesting. Sometimes we like to think about it as like you compared it to TCP/IP. Sometimes we like to think about it internally as kind of the next generation of internet routing services or routing protocols, except everything is cryptographically given a running hash and timestamped with the Hedera network and available on mirror nodes. So it's really like a trusted version of those old school internet protocols or routing protocols that are out there. So I really appreciated that analogy. Is there anything about your roadmap that you're able to share? Like where are you guys at right now and what are you currently working on?
We've got a lot on our plates at the moment. So we're able to proceed in this kind of COVID world virtually just because the quality of the team and the ability to continue to move at pace. We need to execute on these two main things. So digital identity will be taking to market by the end of the year on this federated model. That's the roadmap for that is for next year to interoperate with self-sovereign. So there'll be a potentially convergent path at that point. The micropayments proof of concept will, based on success and iteration, will proceed in a direction that I'm not certain about, because one will build onto another, and we'll get feedback from the community, we'll get feedback from the ecosystem that we're building around it, and see where it goes. But it's pretty exciting. I don't think it'll stop. I'd like to think that this will build, and it'll build a momentum that will just flip at some point and become
Well, you talked earlier about wanting to push the network to the limit.
Yes.
The network today can do 10,000 transactions per second. So
we haven't seen it on mainnet yet, though, have we?
No, exactly. And
so no one's proven
that. Lehman would be happy to lift the throttle if the network needed it. So there's your challenge there.
Yeah, I mean that's a lot of micropayments.
It's a lot of micropayments. You're gonna have to get those IoT devices connected, I think. To
can you imagine a world of smart cities which are hyper connected, full of IoT devices, where payments actually go in waves, because these micro transactions aren't click 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 clunk 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 or batched. They move in a very different way. So you get an ebb and flow of value transfer across this web, this mesh. That's a very different world with hugely different opportunities. That's going to take us a little while to get to. But all of these experiments are preparing us, I think, for that kind of world. If I can break the 10,000 throttle, I'd be very happy. Maybe in tests, we
would be very happy as well.
Well, not if you didn't give us a heads up to lift the throttle, though, then we wouldn't be happy at all.
I'm part of the community, and the community gets all the buzz when we see the test net spiking in terms of transactions per second, and then we see AdStacks and others pushing the main net, and we hear about the coupon bureau and so much that's they're going to put through hopefully by the end of the year. I'd like to be a little bit more open than that. I'm not sure how open I can be, but I'd like to actually tell the community when it's going to happen and provide a dashboard for them to watch it happen. Because I was watching AdStacks when it went to 1,370 or something. I just happened to be online, and it was actually quite exciting. Watching it on Dragonglass and watching it going up. So if I can make an event of it, I will.
Well, I very much look forward to that. And Rob, I really, really appreciate your time and really lucky to have you on the podcast today. Are there any closing words that you would like to leave for our listeners? And is there any way, besides Sharky Rob on Telegram, that people can get in touch with you or learn more about what you're doing?
There's a link in the Hedera Eftpos press release that will take you to the website. You can get me on Telegram or Twitter. I'm Rob_Nodal, Nodl, and easy to find on LinkedIn as well. So I'm pretty engaged and pretty chilled. So very happy to chat with people if they want to spend their time and reach out to me.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining the podcast. We look forward to having you back in the future to keep us updated on all things Eftpos and that you're working on. Really appreciate Christian. Thank you for joining the podcast today and filling in for my co-host, Paul Madsen, who's hopefully enjoying his vacation somewhere.
Yeah, maybe I'll let him back to your next podcast, but maybe I won't. I had a lot of fun, and thank you very much, Rob. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. I didn't hear a single joke, Christian, so I think you failed on that front.
Oh, I fail every day.
Thanks, guys. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Hedera Hashgraph's Gossip About Gossip. If you liked the episode, please subscribe, rate and review, and also share and tell your friends.
Or connect with us on social media like Twitter, Instagram, etc. at Hashgraph, particularly if you want to leave us feedback on the podcast. We look forward to hearing from you.